I have my requisite Christmas Kleenexes with me. So I'm going to awkwardly get one out now, so I have it if I need it. Thank you so much. This service ended up being very much a group effort. Thank you so much. Tokay, thank you so much for the gift of music. When I saw the hymns we were going to be singing, I thought, oh, they don't even need to hear me preach. The hymns preach themselves. Thank you so much for the gift of music that you brought to us on short notice today. So, yes, the scripture reading that I want to focus on for this morning is the scripture reading from Isaiah chapter 35, verses 1 through 10. And I have brought with me a scriptural commentary by one of my colleagues. Can y'all hear me okay? Am I doing right with by one of my colleagues, a woman named Anathea Portier-Young. And Anathea Portier-Young is a professor at Duke in Hebrew Bible and Old Testament. And when I went looking for commentaries that might be helpful for this Sunday in Advent and read hers, I thought, not only am I going to read from her commentary, I'm going to bring you copies. And we will also make sure eventually to send one for people who are viewing online. But there are copies of the commentary, just 2 pages, but her words are so beautiful, I thought it might be helpful for you to have them in front of you for those of you who are more visual learners than oral learners. So thank you for my professor colleague, Anathea Portier-Young, for her words and the attention that she brings to particular words in the Isaiah reading. I want to go through and emphasize some words and then read her commentary. The wilderness and the dry land shall be glad. The desert shall rejoice and blossom. And then again, blossom abundantly. As she notes, the prophet Isaiah has emphasized blossom and blossom. The tongue of the speechless sing for joy. Have you ever been rendered speechless? The tongue of the speechless. I've been rendered speechless before. Words fail me. The tongue of the speechless sing for joy in this vision that Isaiah is bringing to us. For waters shall break forth in the wilderness and streams in the desert. I grew up in the desert Southwest, and I can tell you that when there is a heavy rain, the days after you see flowers color that you don't see any other time. The haunt of jackals. What a phrase. The haunt of jackals. Jackals haunting. The haunt of jackals will become a swamp. The jackals will not be moving very quickly. They'll be kind of mired down, not haunting. There will be no dangerous, ravenous animals. No ravenous beast will come upon this highway which is good news for fools. Did you notice this as well? No one on the highway will get lost, including fools. That's good news. The fools will not get lost. Sighing shall flee away. The speechless will have joy. The fools will find their way. Now I'm going to read from Professor Portier-Young's words. Rejoice. This is the first word of Isaiah's vision in chapter 35, and it is the focus of the entire passage. The time of these opening verses is future, though exactly when is not specified. The place is named clearly and repeatedly. It is the wilderness. And I'm still reading from Dr. Portier Young's work here. This detail of the wilderness is not incidental. It locates God's promise within every human lack, every loneliness, and every desolation. It locates God's promise within a complex history of slavery and redemption, failure and faith. Wilderness, Professor Portier Young notes, has many meanings for Israel. And here, if you have a copy, you can see she's drawing on Genesis, Exodus, Deuteronomy, Exodus again, Exodus, Deuteronomy, Numbers, Psalms. She's drawing on this language of wilderness in particular scriptural passages in this section. Wilderness, she writes, has many meanings for Israel. It is a place of flight and of freedom. It is populated by deadly animals. Water is scarce and crops do not grow. It is dangerous, it is wide, and it is easy to get lost. Wilderness is where God's people learn to trust. In wilderness, God carried them, fed them, and gave them improbable water. In wilderness, God found God's people, guarded and cared for them, and lifted them up. Isaiah's wilderness sings. It will bloom, really bloom. This poetic style, she writes, the prophet sustains throughout this vision. The prophet declares the joy of an earth wrung dry and shows us the reason: a profusion of blooms, shoots of new growth budding towards fruit. This dry earth will be given glory and splendor. The future time of the vision now shifts to the present tense, she writes. With this shift in tense comes also a shift in focus from earth to people, from dry land to weak and frightened bodies, from green growth to courage and strength. Isaiah has a vision. Now Isaiah gives to the audience, to you, to me, to this congregation, a commission. The prophet shows us a pair of hands that have grown weak. They can hold nothing and no longer do the work they were made for. Make them strong. The prophet shows us a pair of knees that give way to stumbling. Who can walk like this? Make them firm. Be strong, do not fear. And the prophet gives a reason, drawing attention now to the one source of strength and salvation. If you open your eyes and look, she writes, you will see that right here is your God. Now, I don't receive this kind of vision very often. I sometimes receive it completely outside of myself. I have never experienced joy as a discipline. There are people who recommend particular disciplines for cultivating joy, and the candle we lit is a candle of joy for this Sunday and Advent. That's not how I have experienced joy. I've experienced joy completely by surprise, when I don't expect it and I haven't been practicing it. I'll tell you about a recent one, a gift that came in spite of me. And part of this has to do with time and expectation. I'm going to get to that in a minute. We know where, the wilderness, but when? What time is this to come? This vision of Isaiah's? Here, now? Recently, when I was at the Museum of Life and Science, walking around, usually one of the things I listen for and look for is I try to listen for the sound of God with the birds. And there are birds at the Museum of Life and Science outside who, I'm trying to remember the name of a ruby-crowned kinglet. I think that's what it's, a ruby-crowned kinglet. They come down from Connecticut during this time of year, of that region, and they hang out here with us in North Carolina during the winter. That's usually what I'm listening for, are new bird sounds. And I'm walking along with Grand Girl, who some of you have met. I'm walking along with Grand Girl, and there is a display next to the little choo-choo train that has little puffed Christmas creatures, Black Panther, Darth Vader, somebody from Frozen, I haven't seen the movie Frozen yet, Frosty the Snowman, a Power Ranger, and Scooby-Doo. And they are all arranged there like they are singing a Christmas carol together, like they're going door to door, something, singing a Christmas carol. And I thought, I just received this vision of these different creatures from very different built worlds, right? Very different worlds that their artistic creator have created for them, all there together, all mixed up, these worlds that other people have envisioned. Scooby-Doo and Darth Vader are singing together. A little vision at the Museum of Life and Science, much less elegant than the kinglet, but a vision of joy. Strange, differently built worlds together, different timelines and storylines, singing carols together. It is whimsical, it is strange, but I experienced it, I will admit, as a summons to joy. As an aside, I will tell you that one of the other times I experienced joy as a complete and sheer apart from me gift was when I traveled the little highway that is Trinity Avenue down here and came to visit y'all the first Sunday after Thanksgiving a year ago. We also have here the reading from the book of James. Now, the pastoral epistles are not my favorite parts of the Bible. They can be very bossy. If you want to amuse yourself sometime, read 1st and 2nd Timothy and think, wow, you know, the church has been scary. It's not just scary now. There have been times when the church was scary, and we have record of it in the pastoral epistles. In the book of James here, the connection to the vision in Isaiah that really strikes me is here this writer of the epistle is telling us to be patient, to strengthen our hearts like the prophets. Okay, I'm not good with being patient. That is not my strong suit. What would it mean for me to think through, for us to think through together what it means to be patient like the prophets? Were the prophets patient? What does it mean to be patient like the prophets? So one of the commentators, really the commentator on the prophets, who I turn to Abraham Joshua Heschel for all sorts of reasons, but one of the reasons I turned to Abraham Joshua Heschel, who was writing in the 1960s, and he was writing about the prophets. I believe this volume, which is 2 volumes bound together, 1962 is the first copyright for this collection on the prophets, and I'm happy to loan somebody this volume after I preach the Sunday after Christmas. I'm going to need it for then, but I'm happy to loan it to somebody if you'd like. But thinking about what does it mean to be patient like the prophets? And what came to my mind was Abraham Joshua Heschel's term, the prophets are morally maladjusted. Morally maladjusted. I want to read to you from Heschel here. The prophet is a person who suffers from profound maladjustment to the spirit of society, with its conventional lies, with its concession to man's weakness. Compromise is an attitude the prophet abhors. This seems to be the implication of his thinking. Compromise has corrupted the human species. All elements within his soul are insurgent against indifference. Insurgent against indifference. The prophet's maladaptation to his environment may be characterized as moral madness. The mind of the prophet seems to live in a realm different from the world which most of us inhabit. The prophet claims to sense, to hear, and to see in a way totally removed from a normal perception, to pass from the actual world into a mysterious realm and still be able to return oriented to reality and to apply the content of his perception from this other world to reality. What does it mean to be patient like the prophets? Okay, writer of James, I might be able to receive the gift of being patient with moral maladjustment. Abraham Joshua Heschel and Martin Luther King Jr. were colleagues and friends. They were both speaking and writing about prophetic maladjustment. They both used that term around the same time during the mid to the late 1960s. The Martin Luther King Jr. Institute at Stanford names this as one of many connections between the two men, between Abraham Joshua Heschel and Martin Luther King Jr. When King delivered his famous address, and I'm quoting from the King Institute, when King delivered his famous address against the Vietnam War at Riverside Church on 4th of April, 1967, Heschel followed him as a speaker and ended his own presentation saying, I conclude with the words of Dr. King, the great initiative of this war is ours. The initiative to stop it must be ours. Martin Luther King, during this same time, calls for what he called the cultivation of creative maladjustment. Creative maladjustment. And I will say creative maladjustment is different than resilience. Different than figuring out ways to adapt to survive under conditions of racial terror, economic austerity, sexual domination, conditions that are morally absurd. Creative maladjustment by Heschel's description and King's description is different than just getting by. Take the prophets, James advises, as an example strengthen our hearts like them. Reading Heschel, a 20th century rabbi, alongside James, a 2nd century letter writer, I am given some sense of hope to be morally maladjusted. Another word that Heschel said about the prophets. The prophet is sent not only to upbraid, to scold, but also to strengthen the weak hands and make firm the feeble knees. Isaiah is giving us also strength to strengthen our weak hands and make firm the feeble knees. Not so we can dance perfectly, so that we can have creative maladjustment. There has been a song that's been going through my head since I found out I was going to be preaching this Sunday, and that is a song that was rendered so resonant by artist Stevie Wonder, released in 1966, so the same decade as creative maladjustment, moral maladjustment, calls from Heschel and King, Someday at Christmas. Now, I'm not going to sing it for y'all because my voice is not completely doing great this morning, but you can look it up. Someday at Christmas was rendered so resonant by artist Stevie Wonder in 1966. It was written by a Jewish songwriter for Motown named Ron Miller. Ron Miller also wrote For Once in My Life, also rendered so resonant by artist Stevie Wonder. So here are words that you can hear from this Jewish songwriter for Motown, rendered resonant by Stevie Wonder. Someday at Christmas, men won't be boys, playing with bombs like kids play with toys. One warm December, our hearts will see a world where men are free. Someday at Christmas, there'll be no wars. When we have learned what Christmas is for, when we have found what life's really worth, there'll be peace on earth. Someday, all our dreams will come to be. Someday, in a world where men are free, maybe not in time for you and me, but someday at Christmas time. Someday at Christmas, we'll see a land with no hungry children, no empty hand. One happy morning, people will share our world where people care. Someday at Christmas, there'll be no tears. All men are equal and no men have fears. One shining moment, one prayer away from our world today. Someday, all our dreams will come to be. Someday, in a world where men are free, maybe not in time for you and me, but someday at Christmas time. Someday at Christmas, man will not fail. Hate will be gone and love will prevail. Someday, a new world that we can start with hope in every heart. Someday, all our dreams will come to be. Someday, in a world where men are free. Maybe not in time for you and me, but someday at Christmas time. Someday at Christmas time. From their words to God's ear, may it be so.